Hello, I'm Jenya Delima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author-focused podcast that takes a whole-person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. When we think of scary stories, we might first think of supernatural, the ghosts, the hauntings, and all those creatures that hide under our bed. But these are often rooted in the ordinary, or at least they start out that way. And it's when we sense that something isn't quite right that our senses really begin to prickle. And here to explain how you too can find horror in the familiar is author Brian Asman. Well, first, thank you so much for being here.
Jen, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited for our chat this morning.
Me too. And just before we even get into it, you might be the funniest person on Facebook. So if anyone's looking for someone who picks out those scammers, always has the sassiest replies for them, this is the guy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do try to entertain.
Well, you do. I think I've directed more than a few people to follow you just for that. Hopefully they're reading your books too, but
Yeah, reading my books is great, but I know not everyone has the amount of time. Our TBRs are huge. We don't have time to read everything. So yeah, if you want a small dose of what I can deliver, follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll do my best to make it worth your while.
Yeah, speaking of content, so your short story collection that's coming out has undergone an evolution since its creation. And I was hoping that you could share what changed and also why.
Sure, absolutely. So for everyone who's not aware, my book, Man, This House and Other Disasters, comes out October 7th. And so the main novella, Man, This House, was originally published as a standalone in October 2021 and did pretty well. And then in about 6 months after it came out, it really blew up because of a tweet. Screenwriter Molly Hodgson, who is best known for Rogue One and Jurassic World, tweeted, "Oh, this is the best title for a haunted house book I've ever seen." And so all of a sudden, everything went just atmospheric, There were just an insane number of sales over a period of a couple days. I was like number 98 in the entire Amazon store worldwide at one point.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that's
Which
amazing.
was just so exciting, and like celebrities were tweeting about the book and like actually reading the book too.
Mm-hmm.
Diedrich Bader, who, you probably know from like Office Space as the neighbor,
Yeah.
for example, Drew Carey's show. So he read the book and like tweeted about it, which was awesome because we actually grew up in the same neighborhood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he went to high school just down the street from where I grew up. I didn't know him or anything like that. He was a little bit older than me. But yeah, it was just cool seeing like, my hometown hero tweeting about my book. And so I started getting a lot of film interest at this time too, which was cool, and I had no idea what to do with it, right? So I talked to my literary agent. I'm like, "Hey, what should we do?" And she's like, "Well, I have this friend who specializes in representing books to film, basically. And he also works for Blackstone." And so he took a look at the book and was like, "What if I just buy this and we republish it?" So very similar to what Eric LaRocca had just done at the
Oh, yeah.
time with Things Have Gone Worse Since Last We Spoke with Titan. So I call it pulling a LaRocca, frankly. So quick shout out
Should
to
we
Eric.
tag him in the show notes? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. The first book in his Burnt Sparrow trilogy just came out last week. So go check it out, everyone. So it was always essentially the plan to republish this with some additional short stories in and just see if we could like bring it to an even wider audience.
And did you always have ideas for other short stories to pair with it, or is that something that you didn't really think about until after it went viral?
As far as the specific stories, that was actually a pretty interesting process. So my editor at Blackstone, Brendan, who is also my film agent, Brendan Deneen, he actually had a book called Tracer that just came out 2 weeks ago. So everyone go check that out because he's a writer too.
You're
So
building
anyway,
everyone's TBR minute by minute here.
I know, right? That's my goal. I hope everyone is currently going to their indie bookstore website and ordering all these books I'm talking about. So anyway, he had me send him a list of every short story I've ever written with like a one sentence description. And then he picked like 20 that he thought were like worth checking out, because the main approach we were taking was we have to find stories that are going to pair well with the main narrative,
Right.
but also we want to find stories that have a core concept that Hollywood will find enticing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the goal, is to just pick stories that are, could become movies and try and sell those. And a couple of them have been optioned since, so things are working out really well in that respect.
Yeah, did you work on that together, or did he give those recommendations after you sent the 20 along?
So after I sent the 20 along, he went through them and then we just aligned further down on like which ones we actually wanted to put in the collection from there. So there was a little back and forth, but we were mostly like pretty much on the same page.
Oh,
So with these, also several of them I also completely rewrote. Like the last story in the collection, The Tire Swing, which is sort of a bookend to Man This House. It kind of thematically pairs a little bit with it. That one I had written in like 2017 or so. And so I rewrote that thing from the ground up for
mhm.
this collection, basically.
Speaking of things like a house and a tire swing, why do you think that the everyday and the ordinary make such great fodder for horror stories?
That's a good question. I think it's the things that surround us, right? We have to trust the things around us to a certain extent. Otherwise, we'd be paranoid freaks and go completely insane. Like everything we do, every moment of every day involves some level of trust, right? When I walk across like the floor, I have to trust that that floor will still be there with every step. And most of us don't really think about that. But like if you're a horror writer, you think, well, what if all of a sudden the floor collapsed or something like that, right? If you're making toast, like what if all of a sudden the toaster exploded or, this or that happened, right? And so I think the idea of the ordinary things that we just have complete and total trust in as being innocuous, the idea that those things can turn on us is really scary.
Yeah, I want to talk about that word trust because it sounds like what you're saying is this is a breaking of trust. And we see that with relationships too, whether it's a family dynamic or a neighbor or a friend. And I'd love to have you expand on that too.
Sure, definitely. I mean, I think for me, that's one of the things that's the most scary for me is, people in my life betraying my trust, which unfortunately has happened in some pretty spectacular ways a couple times. And so I guess part of the reason why I talk about this so much in my work is because I am still a little sore from some of these experiences, which I won't get too much into. Although I will say one of the major formative things in my life that I think probably informs this idea of my trust with the people around us and trust in familial relationships is the fact that I was given up for adoption at birth.
Oh.
And so I think having my first experience in life be this one of like separation and being pulled away from my biological mother, I think that probably has really informed a lot of my views on trust and the things I'm trying to work out with my books.
Yeah, I can see that too. So I know you have one where it's a mother and a daughter. And again, it comes back to that whole what we expect of those familial relationships that I can trust my parents implicitly. They're always going to be there for me. They're going to do this and this, or that your child will love you no matter what, that sort of thing. And so then when they turn on you in some capacity, yeah, again, it's that breaking of trust, that breaking of expectations for what we think is going to always come from this relationship.
That's exactly it. And if you look at crime, for example, people are not usually victimized by strangers. They're victimized by people close to us, right? They're victimized by family members. They're victimized by romantic partners, by neighbors, things like that. The stranger crime is actually like a very small sliver
Right.
of
It's like 1 or
overall crime
2% or
against
something
individuals.
ridiculously small. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we all think about is what if these people did turn on us? Because they do every day.
Yes. So why then do you think that we are so geared toward fearing the stranger or the strange and unknown and not those things that are known to us, like the spouse or the parent or the toaster?
I think because it's easier in a way to like let that stranger stand in for all of our fears. And don't get me wrong, the unknown is scary that just because we don't know what's there, right? A dark room, anything could be there. When you're swimming in the ocean and you can't see the bottom, anything could be underneath you. And your mind is trained to fill in the blanks when
Mhm.
there are these dark spaces that we can't perceive. So I think that's one of those things where we find ourselves scaring ourselves and we become terrified of things that are unlikely. So I live at the beach here in California, and when I'm in the ocean, for example, the chances of me being bitten by a shark are astronomically low. I have such a better chance of like, I don't know, like choking on my taco after I get out of the water, for example, and like, collapsing. But still, like whenever I'm in the water, like sometimes I'll just get this kind of like, what if,
Makes you
especially
like
if
a
I'm
true
like,
horror author, yes.
yeah, I think we're all conditioned as horror authors to, expect the worst because that's our bread and butter, right? And any given situation, we're like, how could this go horribly wrong? Because if I run out of ideas for things going horribly wrong that are compelling, then I'm in a lot of trouble. But yeah, so I think a lot of it is our mind filling in the blanks, and that's why strangers are scary. But it's also easier just to take all of our fears and project them onto the strangers because that allows us to tell ourselves, well, the things around me aren't going to hurt me, even though they could. But we just choose not to think about that. We choose just to be afraid of the other, the outsider.
Yeah, which do you think is scarier then? Something that is supernatural and completely out of our wheelhouse, or our expected daily events, or something that is ordinary and familiar to us?
I think that's highly personal, and I think it changes for everyone. I will say, certainly, there was one moment, the scariest moment in my own life was when I was having a conversation with someone I thought I knew, and I realized as they're talking that I know literally nothing about them. It's like they had been completely replaced by like a different person. And it was truly terrifying. That said, I think the supernatural is scary too. But it just depends. Some people are like, well, I don't find the supernatural scary because I don't believe in it. And for me, it's all about the context of the world. So like I don't really believe in supernatural stuff either. I'm a pretty rational person, but I suspend disbelief when I pick up a horror book that has ghosts in it because I want to be scared, right? I don't want to sit there like the guy who's too cool for school, like, going like, well, whatever, man. Like I want to engage with it. It's kind of like when people watch like Marvel movies, for example, no one wants to be the person who's like, well, nah, people can't actually fly, people can't have super strength, blah, blah, blah. Like it's not fun, right? And so
I
like
know.
it's
Yes.
kind of like the same thing. It's like just don't be lame. Have fun.
No, I sat next to someone during one of the Narnia movies who did exactly that and was nitpicking the choice of armor. And I said, but we have talking animals and wardrobes that enter another dimension. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure that this is the conversation we should be having.
Do
Bring
you have
that
anything
stuff.
better to do?
No.
My gosh. Yeah.
So you talked about filling in the blanks when you were talking about going into the ocean and not being able to see what is beneath you. And is that something that you employ in your stories?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for horror, Stephen Graham Jones said this to me once, but I think he's written an article about it too on his website. But it's called the just the toe principle, where monsters are so much scarier when all you see is like a little piece of them, right? Because your mind will fill in those blanks. If you see just their toe, then you're like, oh my gosh, what does the rest of this thing look like? But if you just look at a picture of a monster, it's not as scary as what your mind will fill in, right? And so that's something I try to remember when I'm in my work, basically, is let the reader fill in the blanks themselves.
Is there an example you're able to share from your own writing where you've done this without giving anything away?
Without giving anything away.
Or maybe a
Um,
minimal amount?
yeah. I'm trying to think through, but I mean, I think frequently in most of my stuff, right, you don't exactly see everything. There's stories like Razor Bill in the collection, for example, which is about a haunted outhouse in an old west town.
Right.
And yeah. I was like, what's the most ridiculous place you could have a haunting, right? I was like, that's not been done before, as far as I know, right? And if it has been done before, I really should probably go get drinks with whoever wrote the other story about the haunted outhouse because we'd probably be best friends. But in that, like, right, it's like this dark and closed space, and you don't see what's in it, right? And the idea is you open the door and you knock on the door a number of times, and then something happens, right? And it's that box, that Schrodinger's cat principle, where it's like anything could be in there.
Yeah, and then there's vulnerability too. I mean, just think about the position you're put in anytime you need to use the restroom.
Yes.
But yes, so is vulnerability something that also comes up a lot, not just maybe in your work, but do you think in horror in general?
Oh yeah, exactly. I think it's definitely one of the main reasons why horror exists is because we all are vulnerable in lots of different ways, and it's about exploring all the ways that the world can hurt us in a safe manner.
Yes. Well, do you find yourself looking at everyday occurrences or items and finding the potential for horror in them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's probably not a lot of people who would look at like an Old West outhouse and go, like, what if that was haunted by an angry ghost with a razor? So yeah, I think I do find myself doing that. For me, a lot of the time, like I walk my dog about 5 miles a day,
Mhm.
every day, because I really like walking my dog, and I live in a beautiful place.
Well, any, yeah.
So when I'm walking around, I just let my mind wander because I'm always trying to come up with like what's the next thing I'm going to work on, what's the next thing I want to create, because just coming up with new ideas is just so much fun for me, right? So my mind is always going in those directions, and because of the genre, right, it's always going in those darker directions, sure.
And then how does your sense of knowing when to reveal that something isn't quite right differ when you're doing shorter fiction versus full-length fiction?
It's a good question. So I think primarily it's a matter of timing, right? Because in shorter fiction, you just have less space. But I think generally the principles remain the same, right? Where in a novel, you don't want to reveal everything until you get close to the end. I think in a short story, it's the same way. You want to have a build up. It's just a more abbreviated build up in a short story than in a novel.
Yeah, and can you give an example too of how you might flesh out something longer? Say if you took the same short story and now you decided to expand it into a full-length work, in what ways would it differ? And then in what ways would it be the same?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think in short stories, first of all, it's you're gonna add more characters, you're gonna add subplots, things like that. So I think any concept could essentially be a short story or a novel, if depending on how you approach it, right? Because many novels have, or even films. I like talking about films. Do have a very simple, straightforward concept, like Friday the 13th. What if there's someone running around the camp killing campers? Right? It's a pretty straightforward concept.
Well, it's the same too when you think about marketing, you have to come up with that tagline. And yeah, you could use the
Mhm.
tagline for something no matter how long or short it is. But I'd also be interested in hearing about how you would build tension. So, do you add more tension early on? Do you pull back maybe somewhat in the middle with a longer piece? How does that look for you?
Yeah, there is a lot of back and forth. I think in horror, you have to set the tone early,
Mhm.
which is why I love cold opens. Cold opens are perfect for horror because you can just show something horrible happening and then cut to the main story. And just a way to acclimate the reader. Like in the book I'm writing right now, I actually just finished the prologue. I was working on the main meat of it. And I just went back and decided to write the prologue this past weekend, but there's like characters that you don't see again and horrible things happening to them. Generally, in a novel, because the person is going to sit with it for so long, it can't just be all tense all the time for the most part. Otherwise, that becomes like not a fun experience. So you have to like slowly build tension in the beginning and then have some tension releases, which is why I incorporate humor into my stories
Yes,
frequently.
just something I was going
Yeah.
to ask you about because you do that so well too. So, knowing when to add humor, how do you do that? Or even what types of humor do you employ?
Thank you. First of all, it has to be natural, but I think a lot of the time, I always say like life isn't just one thing. Life is a whole bunch of different things. And so you don't want your book to be one note. And I think for me, very little of what I do is actually planned. It's all just kind of organic.
Oh,
Any humor in my books just arises from me just having a good time while I'm writing, frankly. So I don't really think too much about like how to incorporate it. It just kind of happens naturally. I've always been the kind of person that can write, I call it rhythmically.
mhm.
So every book has a rhythm. And once you learn what that rhythm is, you can just kind of ride the wave of it as you're going. And so in my editing process, for example, I don't usually make a lot of major changes after my first draft. A lot of it is simply just refining things. There are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, the first draft, a lot of the chapters are almost verbatim in the final draft versus the
That's
first draft.
rare.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not trying to say like I'm some like,
No, no,
brilliant
go
author
ahead.
or anything like that. It's more just like that's how my particular process works. Like,
Yeah, you talked about tone too. So I'd like to have you say what you mean, not just by tone, but what type of tone you're going for. And also why that's important to set it early on.
yeah, exactly. I think the reader like will pick up a book based on the cover, the back cover copy, what their friends are talking about, and whatever the promise of the premise is, you need to deliver that early on, or at least you need to deliver like a wink to the reader that yes, what you're expecting is going to come true and we'll get there. And so I guess what I mean by that is you have to think about how your book will be viewed by others and ensure that you are essentially just delivering on their expectations. And that's kind of knowing the tropes of your genre. You can subvert tropes. Absolutely. It's great to subvert tropes. But if I look at a fantasy novel on the shelf, right, and the cover has a couple people in cloaks with broadswords, I'm going to expect that there's going to be some sword fighting, some wars. I'm expecting like kind of like a high fantasy quest type tone, right? And if I start reading the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all set in a cabin and it's about this one girl's relationship with her father. Yes, they live in a fantasy world, but like, I go 300 pages, there's not a single sword fight. I'll be like, what the hell? Right. And so,
And people
and
like,
of
yeah,
course,
bro. Yes, exactly.
yeah. Yeah, so I think it's important just to think about like, what is the reader going to expect from your book? So with horror, for example, it's kind of straightforward. Readers expect to be scared, to be disgusted, to be shocked, all those things. And so you can have a slow burn horror. I love slow burn horror.
Yes, so do I.
But I think you need to let the reader know somehow that creepy things are in store. And I think one of the ways you can do that is just by having sort of red herrings or false
Yes.
scares. Essentially, I think we've all seen this in a movie, right? Where a character is like, maybe they're on their computer reading about some urban legend and they're like, the music's getting tense and they're like, bending over the computer, like, what is, oh my gosh, all these things. This is just like what we've been experiencing, right? And then their door suddenly opens and it's their mom or their dad.
Yes.
That's what I mean by like a false scare. So I think you can incorporate some stuff like that early on in your horror novel where you don't have to turn things up to 11 immediately.
Right. Yeah. I think too that type of foreshadowing to something bigger coming also works really well because it builds that sense of anticipation. You know, this isn't it, but it also clues you in that there is something coming and it's going to be huge.
Absolutely.
Well, before we end, do you have any upcoming projects that you're able to talk about?
Other than the book coming out October 7th, I unfortunately don't have anything I can talk about right now. Hopefully, very soon. Astute listeners might have noticed that I did mention I'm working on a new novel, and I will hopefully have some news about that very soon. I actually did sign another deal recently that I can't talk about yet as well. So I've got two projects that we will hopefully be announcing in the next, say, couple months.
And where's the best place to look for those announcements when they come up?
So if you go to my website, brianasmanbooks.com, you can sign up for my mailing list. I only send about one email a month or so I'm not going to spam your inbox or anything, but it's the best place to get any news about, say, if I have a new short story in some anthology or magazine. I'm actually about to send out a notification to everyone about my upcoming book tour. And so if you don't mind, actually, I could run down the dates of the book tour
Oh,
real quick
yes.
for any of your
You.
listeners.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so it kicks off October 4th here in San Diego. I'm going to be doing an event with Philip Fracassi, whose book, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, is coming out.
Yep.
And that's it on October 4th at Mysterious Galaxy at 4 p.m. After that, the following week on the 9th, I'll be at Poison Pen Books in Arizona. And that, I believe, is at 7 o'clock. The night after, I'll be in Albuquerque at an event sponsored by Books on the Bosque. And that is going to be an absolutely insane event. I don't want to not name anyone, but there's 9 horror authors, myself, Fracassi, Nat Cassidy, Clay Chapman, CJ Lead, Jennifer Gavon, T. Kingfisher, Keith Rawson, and unfortunately, I think I'm probably missing 1 or 2 people. But that's going to be an absolutely amazing event, so go check that out. The following day, the 11th, I come back, I'm doing an event with Jonathan Mayberry at Artifact Books in Encinitas. That's at 3 p.m. And again, this will all be on my website if any of your readers want to go get it there. And then at the end of the month, I'm doing a couple events in Louisiana. I'm doing the Louisiana Book Festival. That is on November 1st in Baton Rouge. Then the following day, the 2nd, I'm doing an event it's at 1 p.m. at Octavia Books, and that will be with Philip Fracassi and also Christina Henry.
Oh, I love her.
So, yeah, I'm getting to team up with some amazing writers for these
Oh, but
events,
so
and
are
I'm super
they.
excited. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jen. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
And thank you for listening. And be sure to check out the show notes for additional information, including all of Brian's links. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I'd appreciate if you could rate or review the podcast on your favorite listening platform. Thanks again.